When you work with your data for a long time, you become such an expert at your own data that it can be difficult to remember that other people are not experts and may be seeing the data or the data graphic for the first time. It's easy to forget that they might not understand everything and they might need a walkthrough before getting into the details. Let me give you an example. So it's pretty clear what's going on here, and basically it's easier to suppress 50 Hz gamma oscillations compared to the rest of the spectrum. Okay, did you really understand what was going on in that graph and what was the main point that I was trying to illustrate? Unless you have some neuroscience training, I guess you were probably lost with what I just said. It went by too quickly and you weren't really sure what was going on, except that somehow the lines here are a little bit different. You might have been so focused on looking around at the legends and the X labels and the Y-axis labels that maybe you weren't even listening to me. The thing is, even if you have a relatively clear and self-explanatory graphic, if the audience doesn't know how to interpret it, they're going to start looking around at the graphic, at the legends, the captions, the axis labels, and so on, and they're not going to be paying attention to you. So you might be saying something really important and the audience might miss it. But, on the other hand, if they see and hear that you are explaining how to interpret the graph, they will immediately start paying attention to you because you're telling them exactly what they want to know. So with that in mind, let me start this example again. I'm now going to show you some results from the effects of anesthesia on brain oscillations. The results are presented in a power spectral graph, which looks like this. Now, you might not be familiar with looking at these kinds of graphs, so let me take a moment to walk you through how to interpret the axes. So what we do is decompose a time series signal, like brain electrical activity, into a set of frequencies that are like sine waves, these wiggly lines that you see here. So smaller numbers on the x-axis indicate lower frequencies, so slower components in the time series, and higher numbers on the x-axis correspond to faster fluctuations in the signal like what you see here. So that's the x-axis. The y-axis indicates power, and power basically corresponds to the difference between the troughs and the peaks of these time series components. So power values down here mean lower amplitudes, and when you get further up on the y-axis, you have signals that are at the same frequency, but with larger amplitude fluctuations. So with this in mind, what this plot shows is that brain oscillations at a range of frequencies between when the patient was awake and when the patient was under anesthesia. And it's interesting to see that the two spectra are the same or almost the same at most frequencies except for this range here, peaking at around 50 Hz and varying from around 45 up to just over 60 Hz. So there's a particular range of speeds of brain electrical activity where there's really a suppression that's related to anesthesia. And that is an interesting finding because this is a frequency range that other areas of neuroscience research have linked to consciousness and conscious awareness. Okay, you can see what I did here. I started by explaining how to interpret this graph in general before talking about the specific patterns of results. Now, this kind of strategy isn't always necessary. It depends on the complexity of the plot, and it depends on the background of your audience. But it can be important when the data are complicated and when the audience might not be really familiar with interpreting these kinds of graphs. By the way, in case you were ignoring me in the beginning of this video and busy looking for Waldo, he's right over here.